All right, welcome back. It's been more than a week since my last video, and it's not because I didn't want to make one, but just been very, very busy. First of all, it was a religious holiday. I had to drive out of town, and it's just been very difficult, even just to work on writing. So, other than that, it's been okay. And me and my wife had a great Passover holiday. I'm sure those of you celebrating Easter this week, you'll want a little break from the craziness as well. So, I am going to get into it though. Before we do that, I do want to urge you to follow me on any of the platforms that I have featured below. Odyssey, Subscribe, Star if you want to donate a little, BitChute, Rumble, Minds, and Gab. I don't really work that much in Parlor, so just a personal preference. Nothing against those of you that do. Here's the deal. So, of course, some of the main events that have happened concerning the Colorado grocery store shooting and the issues relating to it, I think, are driving America towards some sort of major civil conflict. And I hope that I'm wrong. I think that those that are hoping for something like that to actually happen ought to really think about what that would mean for their own personal lives. Now, I get it if some people are prepared for it or they think it might as well just happen already. We've been seeing all these hints of it for a long time. Remember that there are people who live in this society who are either elderly or infirm, or you're talking about younger people, below the age of 10, that they get wrapped up in a hot conflict. They could be certainly put on a course for personal ruin, right, forever, either physically threatened or they have their livelihood taken away from them because society starts to collapse around them. There will be no social barrier to suffering that, compared to what we have today, right? People will have to cope with the consequences of a real civil conflict. And there's many angles that we could take on this. Of course, there's all of the foreign affairs issues that have been going on over the past week and a half concerning China and Russia, where the U.S. just continues to be involved in all the wrong places in the wrong ways, to some degree worse than Obama did, right? We could talk about what's been happening with Eastern Ukraine and how Obama continues to just, I would say, poke the bear with Russia, as if there's anything to be gained by anyone involved from some sort of hot conflict between Ukraine and Russia. It just isn't the way it is, right? We have nothing to gain from a war between Russia and Ukraine. In fact, we have everything to lose by backing this Ukrainian effort that's really not going to gain anything. I don't anticipate Ukraine regaining the territory that it lost in 2012 and 13. But everything that's going on overseas, concerning Russia, China, and Iran, I think that those are major issues, but they're not as big as the issues that are going on in this country. And really the one thing that I think is leading to more and more division in America is the gun debate. Now, I shouldn't have said the word, but we're just going to use the word firearm as much as I can from now on because of the ridiculous YouTube censorship. But again, the idea that we live in a society where this is honestly talked about can't be even entertained when on YouTube you cannot speak freely using all the terminology that's available, because then your video will be suppressed because it will be deemed controversial. But here goes anyway. Average firearm ownership by state you can actually see in some of the states that you would not expect, it is rather high. For example, in Oregon, it's 44% of people. So not counting Portland, where, by the way, I believe in Portland there's plenty of people with firearms. They might not be of the political persuasion as the majority of firearm owners, but there's definitely a lot of firearms in Portland. 44% of the people in Oregon. That means out of every two people that you meet, you stand a chance of one of them being armed, right? Another state that people wouldn't think is very well armed is Vermont, where 46% of the population is armed. That's even higher, right? And it sort of makes sense. These are rural states. Bernie Sanders, who is the senator from Vermont, and Vermont being one of the most liberal, socially liberal states in the union, he said that it is a rural versus urban, division of attitudes, right? People who live in rural areas, they don't necessarily have the ability to rely on local authorities for their personal defense, right? If there's a home invasion or any other, event, so they have to take things into their own hands. But I don't really think of it that way, right? I think obviously if you live in a rural area, you probably are conditioned already to take your own defense into your own hands. But even people in urban areas, and in my family, it's sort of swayed harder and harder towards the pro Second Amendment side over time, although there are people who continue to, in my family, to be very much against it. But there are more people than ever who are saying we have to be able to respond before authorities arrive rather than wait for what might happen while they're on their way, right? So, I've taken, precautions. I'm not going to go into in depth as to how far I've taken precautions, but, people around me have taken precautions. And I encourage you also at home. I don't really care what other background you're from as long as you're of sound mind and are capable of legally owning one. You should at least familiarize yourself and try to learn about these devices, firearms, and see if it's something that's good for you and your situation. It's not for everyone. People who they have limited space in their house and they're on a budget, or they have problems with little children living in the house, or children with emotional problems, or they themselves have. No, I don't think that everyone should own one, but people should at least entertain it. Maine has 45% ownership, even Delaware 30%, and Maryland 21%. So out of every 5 people in Maryland, one of them may have a firearm. That's a pretty high percentage. So Florida is way down at 29%. That's pretty important. And I'm using this map in order to illustrate that we should not be in a situation where we're talking about this potential gun grabbing legislation by President Biden, where he wants to do this assault weapons ban and go back to the situation between 1993 and I think it was 2003 when the assault weapons ban was expired. It was not an effective piece of legislation. The Columbine massacre happened against the backdrop of the assault weapons ban, right? So it happened in 99. The weapons that were used were deemed to be compliant under the assault weapons ban, and it's created a string of copycat attacks as well. And one of the reasons that I don't believe legislation will help is because when these events happen, when these tragic shootings happen, the media they don't glorify the shooter, obviously, but they revel in the carnage that the shooter has created. And in many ways, they immortalize the person who committed it. They did that with respect to Columbine. I certainly think so. the two shooters in that situation. Their names were known to almost everyone when I was growing up, right? I was only about 13 years old when Columbine happened. So those events, the ones where people are, people go insane and they create all this carnage, they ought to be used as teaching moments to see exactly where are the weak points of our society. And the weak points have nothing to do with the weapons that are available, because a lot of the weapons had been banned already before Columbine. And then consequently, afterward, there were other shootings. There was if any of you remember, there was the D.C. Maryland sniper, John Allen Muhammad, and his friend Lee Malvo, I think his name was. So that was also a pretty, maybe I shouldn't have said their names, but these two guys, they went on a spree killing adventure in I think 2001. So these situations, they occur in spite of the so-called assault weapons ban, and in reality, I can probably speak for the majority of Americans when I say nobody expects the federal government to be competent in reconfiscating all those weapons, right? They're not competent in many of their other efforts up till now. You can see all this idiocy concerning the dispensation of the vaccines and other such, efforts that they go through, how they manage, some of these stimulus payments and all the fraud involved in that. So people are aware that these are not really the crispest cookies in the jar that are running this country, and it's just nobody's expecting it to really work. There's also this this story from Pew Research, and this was in September. Since then, it's really gone up. But it says recent surveys find that about 40% of adult Americans own a gun or live with someone who does. A majority of those gun owners cite protection as their primary reason for owning a gun, and most believe the guns they own make this. So again, I'm saying the word. So if you can, please watch this on BitChute or Odyssey. Sorry, it's hard to discuss this topic without actually mentioning what the topic is about, YouTube, right? I mean, can I talk about Smurfs without saying the word Smurfs? Is that reasonable? I don't think so. But research has consistently shown that households with firearms are actually less safe, with markedly higher risks for accidental deaths, suicides, and domestic homicides. The answer to this question is not straightforward. The exact number of U.S. gun owners is unclear due to the fact that there is no federal registration requirement or similar regulation that would enable an official count. In fact, federal law prohibits a central registry of firearms owned by private citizens. About 40% of Americans say they or someone in their household owns a firearm, and 22% of individuals, about 72 million people, report owning a firearm, according to surveys from Pew and Harvard and Northeastern. So 72 million Americans. Do you realize how problematic that would be for confiscating a significant amount of those? Now, remember, not all of those are assault weapons. A lot of them might be shotguns. A lot of them might be pistols, right? So we're not talking about every single one being confiscated in this batch, right? Because they're only talking about the assault weapons, right? Right. They're only talking about those right now. So the whole problem that we're talking about is, I would say most people who own at least one weapon would probably say that they would be open to possibly owning something more substantial if they really wanted or needed it, right? They're not somebody who would be necessarily against going further, upping the ante in terms of what they own, right? So somebody who might own, let's say, Colt revolver, I don't think that they would say, I would never see myself owning an AR-15. I think most people would say no. I would at least I would give it a shot, no pun intended, see if it was something that worked for me. It says this figure has declined over time, down from 51% of firearm-owning households in 1978. Gun purchases, however, have hit historic highs in recent years, and during the COVID-19 pandemic, Americans also own a disproportionate share of the world's firearms. So again, they go into this whole disproportionate thing here. Look, the truth is, if you go to some of these countries, such as especially in nations in Central Africa, like the Congo, you run a risk by not owning a firearm, right? You might as well own something, because the people who do have ones, they're not exactly the most conversational people. The U.S. has just 4% of the world's population, but owns about 40% of civilian-owned firearms globally, according to a 2018 report from the Switzerland-based Small Arms Survey. The SAS estimates that American civilians own 393 million firearms, ranking the U.S. number one in firearms per capita. And there are costs associated with these high levels of gun ownership. Researchers at Harvard have found that across developed nations, this widespread ownership of firearms is associated with higher rates of gun homicides. So anyway, this goes into a lot of the pitfalls of it. But nobody who is an advocate of more firearms control is really coming forward with a solution, right? They're all saying, oh, we need tougher regulations. We need to restrict sales and everything. I don't personally believe it's going to work. There have already been Supreme Court cases concerning the ghost firearms. So I think this was actually handed down in the past couple of days. So, no, not this one. So this is from American Action News. An Amalan. SCOTUS denies review to New Jersey Attorney General and SAF defense distributed case. The U.S. Supreme Court has denied a petition for certiorari from New Jersey Attorney General Gurbir Grewal, his effort to escape the jurisdiction of the Fifth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals in the ongoing First Amendment case brought by Defense Distributed and the Second Amendment Foundation. The Fifth Circuit had ruled unanimously that Grewal, because of his efforts to prevent the distribution of materials related to the 3D printing of firearms, was subject to the jurisdiction of the Texas courts. Defense Distributed is headquartered in Texas. So what they were doing is they wanted to limit the availability of 3D modeling or even drawings of some of these firearms that can be created using 3D printers, on the grounds that it would create illegal firearms. And the fact is that while it is a problem, I'm not going to say it's not a problem that you're going to have these unlisted or completely anonymous firearms floating around. No, there's no way that you can actually ban these files. In fact, it would probably open the door for even more draconian censorship, which we are going to get to some censorship in this video. So that is a victory for both the Second and First Amendments, although it's a bittersweet victory, because I don't think these ghost firearms are actually good to own. I think they're actually quite hazardous sometimes. They might be, first of all, they break very easily. Also, it comes on the backdrop. I think many of you have probably heard of this, so I'm not going to just focus on this too much. But Hunter Biden, the well-known son of President Biden, apparently bought a firearm in 2018. Okay, so this was before he was before President Biden was running for the presidency, and basically he didn't have the right to, because as a person discharged from the military for a substance abuse addiction, he was required to list that on his form, and he lied about his addiction. He also lied about his dishonorable discharge. And the Secret Service had to track down the firearm that he bought because his former sister-in-law apparently pitched it into the garbage. His former sister-in-law, who, by the way, he was dating. So, you can see this. This doesn't necessarily lead to one thinking this is the most sophisticated man. And there's many accounts of how ridiculous the actual, how ridiculous the actual incident went, because the truth is that Hunter Biden, this is a guy who is a complete mess. He has a criminal history. He also is involved in infinite different sagas concerning his dad and concerning dealings with Ukraine and with China. And people don't want us to talk about it at all. But the fact is, this is a man who did lie on a federal form, according at least to the reports from Politico, right? This isn't from Breitbart or anything. This is from Politico. And they're saying that, yeah, the Secret Service inserted itself into the case of Hunter Biden's firearm, and that would seem to suggest that the laws and regulations that you and I are subject to as American citizens, if you're watching from the U.S., I know some of you are from other countries, but we have to abide by them. He doesn't. He did two illegal things. He filled out a form lying about it, a federal form to purchase a firearm, and then later his girlfriend / former sister-in-law threw the gun into the trash across the street from a school. I mean, how much more of special treatment can you get for all of these things that you do wrong, that the people who are for more firearms controls, they generally try to say, oh, this is why we need it so bad. We need it because these unstable people are walking around and purchasing these, and they're wreaking all sorts of havoc. Well, now one of these people happens to be the son of the president of the United States. He never had any accountability for it because the federal government selectively prosecutes people. The Colorado shooter, okay, this is also true. He was known to the FBI. Okay, it's just a fact. He was screened by the FBI. He was known to the FBI. This was something that they should have been aware of, and if they did know about what he was going to do, and they still didn't block his purchase, then what the hell are these regulations for? The other thing I want to say, and this is something I mention whenever this topic comes up, is that for all the talk about, white people and their guns and their religion and everything, at least where I live, whenever you walk into a fine firearms establishment, you can see people of all different backgrounds. You can see usually the people I see the most are Hispanic people. I also see a lot of black people at one of the locations I go to. There are Arab people who show up. There are, and some people might say, oh, that's the whole problem. People who I don't. I say that the fact is, it is a right even for people who you find to be, that you might not like. Those of you that are prejudiced against a certain race or group, you have the same rights as them. And I encourage everyone to go at least figure out, as long as you have the intention of using these only for defense, right? I'm not talking about idiots who are out there to settle a score or commit some sort of heinous act. But I think people should at least explore these this right and see if it's something that's right for them, so long as you're trying to do it for your own defense. But even Salon in 2017, they wrote this article, or they published it. It was originally an alternate, and they talk about these 6 groups that are not white right-wing groups that are pro Second Amendment. They talk about Redneck Revolt and the John Brown Gun Club, both of which are very, very far left. The Pink Pistols, which is a homosexual group. The National African American Gun Association, right? And that's self-explanatory. The Liberal Gun Club, the Huey P. Newton Gun Club, the Black Guns Matter. So I know people are very conditioned to think that, it's only these toothless yokels who walk around with their Remington shotgun and they're ready to shoot at any damn varmint. No, it's all different backgrounds whenever you go to these stores. And really, what I wanted to say, and I think I might have to do a video that's more dedicated to this, so sorry if I repeat myself then, but this whole debate is really an indicator of how partisan the country has gotten, right? Because when you look at it, the polls are saying 3 in 10 adults say they own one. They own a firearm, right? So it's 49% say that they have one in the household. That's of white Americans, 32% of black Americans, and 21% of Hispanics. But I would wager to guess that in each of those categories, it's probably a little higher than that. I don't think everyone's telling the truth. I also think that when you look at this divide, you see rural versus urban and everything. Nobody who is aware that they have an illegal firearm is going to answer yes truthfully if they're asked on this survey. So the truth is that they're using all of this in order to say, it's the uneducated, it is white people, it's people who are religious, it's people who are poor or whatever. When you have 37% of people with a bachelor's degree or more who either own one or they have somebody in the household who has one, no, it's really something that is very commonplace here in the U.S. And if you're watching from some of these other countries, let's say you live in Canada or Mexico or the UK or Australia, you're saying, well, what is it with you Americans and your attachment to firearms and all of that? Look at the worlds that you guys are living in right now. And I think Mexico might be moving a little bit more towards a free society, unbelievably. But you see what's happening in places like Canada, where you can basically be put into COVID prison right now. And that's one of the real problems that we're having. And in some of these states where there is no, in the U.S., and some of the states where there's very loose protection for the Second Amendment, states like New Jersey and California, the government comes in and behaves just like that. And I'm sorry, but your safety does not negate my freedom. And I think that's an attitude that made America the success that it was, with all of its flaws. I'm not one of these people who's American exceptionalist, but I think it's one of the reasons many people around the world decided to come here, because of the freedoms that were gained, in part because people in the U.S. take it upon themselves to look after both their own welfare and their own protection. And I'm sure many people who did come here would agree with that. A couple of final stories about censorship. So Twitter has censored a CDC advisor and Harvard Medical School professor named Martin Kohlsdorf, who has said, so he participates in the coronavirus safety groups advising the CDC, FIH, and FDA. But now that Kohlsdorf has expressed his misgivings around the idea that children and youth must also be inoculated against COVID, this Harvard professor is facing Twitter censorship. Kohlsdorf's real-life credentials appear hard to beat. 25,000 academic citations to date, on infectious disease topics that are his expertise. In addition to his Harvard role and the one as the Brigham and Women's Hospital epidemiologist and biostatistician. So he even talks here, when making unscientific claims, media often refer to health officials or experts without citing anyone. I challenge Twitter to name vaccine experts, believing that everyone, including children and those with prior immunity from natural infection, must be COVID vaccinated. This was on March 28th. And this was a tweet that got him censored. So, yes, we're seeing literally, we started talking about the Second Amendment, but really I think it goes hand in hand with the First Amendment. You see a person, he's with all this worship of Fauci. Like, this is a guy, Martin Koldorf, who he seems to be at least an authority among people in the field on infectious disease. And rather than, say that, oh, you have a right to be part of this conversation, and he of all people has that right. By the way, you have the right too. But he of all persons has the right to be in the conversation about vaccination and about COVID. And yet Twitter is censoring him and saying, it's a little too dangerous for people to hear the opinion of someone who is an infectious disease expert at a time when we think the public should be at ease about having their children vaccinated for an illness that is typically presented in its most extreme form among the senior citizens, the obese, people with respiratory illnesses, and people with immune disorders. Like basically saying, no. Why would we put this, use this vaccination against people who are in one of the lowest risk categories? And Twitter doesn't believe he should be heard. I believe YouTube and other platforms, they would follow suit. This is truly a society where authorities fear the well-informed, right? They fear the well-informed, so they choose to curate what the ignorant consume. Facebook says even content in the voice of Donald Trump is banned, deleting a major interview. This I would say is a new frontier in how ruthless censorship is getting. And I don't think it's going to be letting up for a while. And I want you to know that if you go on YouTube, okay, I can go on YouTube right now and search for a speech by Mao Zedong, and you can hear his speech, right? This is one of the most dangerous mass murderers in history. A guy who thought nothing of starving his people to death, executing them, dehumanizing them along the way. It's one of the real reasons that you see people don't really have any trust that big tech is ever going to go back to being a form for everyone. We're seeing a bifurcation of society as a whole. People can't enjoy sports anymore without it veering into politics. Even, I'll probably go into this a different time, but Yahoo Sports recently said, unfortunately, the way that your fandom is defined sort of by your political leanings. That's something that they said in a recent article that they sent me to my email, right? And I don't feel that it should, right? I watch baseball. I don't really care about the political leanings of any of the baseball players. I don't care about the political leanings of any tennis players, race car drivers. It doesn't matter. Right? Your job is to run laps on a track or to volley serves or whatever it is. Shag fly balls. Nothing to do with the GDP, nothing to do with abortion, nothing to do with the death penalty, nothing to do with the war on drugs, nothing to do with the war in Afghanistan. That's your job as an athlete. But because of the constant mingling of the commingling of politics and sports. People can enjoy either. They certainly can enjoy politics anyway, but now they can't enjoy the sports either. So that's about it for right now. I do have to go. I hope to be back with you, hopefully, not long from now. And again, I urge you, if you're watching on YouTube, don't watch on YouTube. Please subscribe elsewhere. Subscribe to me on Odyssey or on BitChute or on Rumble and any of the other platforms below, and have a great night.